Good morning and welcome to the League of Women Voters Whitewater Area's Candidate Forum for State Assembly Race District 43 in advance of the November 5th election. My name is Lynn Binney. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Whitewater Area Board of Directors.
More volume, please. You need to speak up.
Matt is adjusting us, but tell us again if it's not loud enough. In service to our mission to encourage informed participation in government, the League sponsors candidate forums, a public venue for candidates to express their views and positions on issues that matter to you, the voter. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that neither supports nor opposes political parties or candidates, and this applies regardless of whether the offices they run for are partisan or nonpartisan. This forum is being filmed by Whitewater Community TV and live streamed also to their Vimeo website. A recording will soon be rebroadcast on channel 990 and will be available for viewing on the city's website during the weeks leading up to the November 5th election. There are two candidates running in this contested race. The candidates are Scott L. Johnson and Brianna Brown. Assembly District 43 is an open district resulting from the 2024 redistricting that was signed into law by Governor Evers. The new 43rd district includes the Milton area, Edgerton, a portion of the north and east side of Janesville, and happily the entire city of Whitewater. Sometimes due to the fact that we have two counties, we've gotten split down the county lines, but we are all together this time in Whitewater. The League thanks you candidates for accepting our invitation. We thank you for being civically engaged and for your willingness to be here today to share your views so voters can make informed choices on Election Day. The questions I will be asking the candidates are submitted from our in-person audience members. And for those who are watching online or on cable TV, we have an excellent turnout today. Practically every chair is taken. So we thank all who are in person for taking the time to be here. Candidate question cards and pencils are found on the seats. Please raise your hand and have your card picked up, or if you should need additional cards. You may submit questions in this manner throughout the forum. Candidate questions are reviewed by the League members seated behind me. Their job is to sort the questions by topic, check for redundancy, and to not accept questions targeted to a specific candidate. To the best of our ability, the League will vet the accuracy of information in any question asked. That's the extent, however, of our fact-checking, as they call it these days. We will not in any way attempt to correct or police candidate answers to any question. We will turn to questions prepared by the Whitewater League Board only if questions from the public fail to fill the forum's 1.5 hour time frame. You will each have 3 minutes for your opening statement. We'll start with candidate 1 on my left and proceed to candidate 2. Speaking order was determined by a drawing prior to the start of the forum. When you reach 30 seconds remaining in your time, our timers seated in the front row will raise a 30-second card. When your time is up, they will raise a stop sign. This is our means of keeping you within your response time limits. If, when your time is up, you are caught mid-sentence, you may complete your thought, but in the interest of time, we will move on. We ask that the audience remain silent turn off cell phones, and wait to give applause until the end of the forum. Candidates, do you have any questions about our opening remarks? If not, let's begin with Scott L. Johnson for his opening remarks, please.
Good morning. Am I heard? Do I need to lean in any further? I'm Scott Johnson. Today you have the opportunity to learn about two people who have one common trait. We both want to serve you in the state assembly. Our differences may be many. Public servants are role models. Public servants represent all the people. The public holds us to a higher set of standards. The public demands that we be responsible and accountable to them. The public expects us to listen, be respectful, be civil, to lead, then demonstrate that by our actions. Public trust that is placed in the servants requires integrity, transparency, and ethical behavior. A capable public servant has a vast working knowledge of budgeting, understanding how policy drives economic growth and influences behavior. As a public servant, you prioritize needs over wants. You invest where the benefit to the public is the greatest. Voters and taxpayers expect each other to pay their fair share with the government spending it wisely on needs. I believe my opponent is lacking in some of these necessary traits. Education and agriculture are the two largest economic contributors for the state and make up the largest portion of the state's budget. I grew up on a large dairy farm in the 43rd District down by Johnstown. I graduated from Milton High School in the 43rd. I understand agriculture as I've worked in it my entire life, and I continue to farm to this day. I understand the need to properly fund education. I served 15 years on the Fort Atkinson School Board, understand the nuances and the complexity and the challenge of trying to communicate those needs. The opportunity to educate our future generation is the foundation of our future. We have to properly fund our education, and we have to get the results that we desire. I think it's important that we also need to lower the local property tax on the homeowners and the renters, particularly that part that goes to serving public education. I know the value of good roads to move our products, workforce. I don't like paying that kidney tax. I want our EMS and police services to be properly funded. I still pay my property taxes on time. My opponent wants to raise your property taxes while not paying hers.
Thank you. Brianne Brown, for your opening comments, please.
Thank you. All the members of the League of Women Voters for putting together this forum and continuing its long tradition of defending democracy. And thank you to the audience for spending your beautiful morning here with us. A little about me. I'm an Air Force brat. My parents were Vietnam veterans. I was born in West Germany before the Berlin Wall fell, and I spent the formative years of my childhood in the authoritarian country of Iran, where my dad was a military attaché. My parents taught me that the most important thing an American can do is serve their country. And I've done that as a civilian. As a young adult, I became a journalist, specifically the kind of journalist who fact-checked journalism companies and reported on the things they decided to ignore. I moved on to public health and became a chronic disease scientist who did epidemiological research on illnesses caused by pesticide poisoning, PFAS, lead poisoning, and a host of other illnesses caused by one's job. My research was funded by the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health and contributed to workplace and community safety. A lot of my research went to OSHA to help make the workplace safer. I was elected to be president of the country's Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists when I was 30 years old. When I moved to Whitewater with a young family, I focused on community work. I founded a nonprofit children's makerspace, worked with other community leaders to co-found the Whitewater Tuesday Farmers Market, which is almost a decade old now. And I joined the library board 12 years ago and helped raise money for an expansion and renovation that will address the needs of our community groups, families, and teenagers. And we broke ground on that project last Wednesday. And when we lost our grocery store 9 years ago, I helped found the Whitewater Cooperative, which has found a location and should break ground next year. I ran for Common Council and have been elected 3 times, and during my time on council, we have made significant improvements for Whitewater, including a new amphitheater, an Aldi grocery store, and incorporating and professionalizing our fire and EMS departments. Serving on city council has shown me that real bipartisan decision-making is possible. And I got into this race because of the 2022 Dobbs decision taking away women's reproductive rights. I know all too well, after working in geopolitics and public health, and having lived in a country like Iran, where militant religious fanatics succeeded in stripping women of their rights, that we have to continuously defend women to preserve democracy. Thank you, and I can't wait to serve you in Madison.
Thank you for your opening statement. Is everybody hearing everything satisfactorily now?
SCSE.
Pardon?
SCSE.
It could be a little louder? Yes. Everybody could speak a little louder? All right. Thank you. You will each have 2 minutes for your response to questions. The first question will be answered by Mr. Johnson, and then to Ms. Brown. The speaking order will progress in this fashion until closing statements, when the order for opening remarks will be reversed. Again, speaking order was determined by a drawing with the candidates prior to the start of the forum, and our timers are here with their 30-second and stop cards to keep you within your 2-minute response time limit. I actually think this was not what we intended. Previously, we have alternated the first question, or each question between the two, so that the same person doesn't always answer first. Any questions before we begin?
So are we going to alternate who goes first each time?
Correct.
Thank you.
For the questions. By about 10:45, we will take one more question, and then we will move on to the closing remarks. So we are ready for our first question. This question is on the topic of state constitutional change question on the November 5th ballot. The question asks voters to change voting provisions in the state constitution. It is difficult to understand. Should we support it? And here's how the measure is written. State of Wisconsin eligibility to vote referendum. Quote, eligibility to vote. Shall Section 1 of Article 3 of the Constitution, which deals with suffrage, be amended to provide that only a U.S. citizen 18 or older who resides in an election district may vote, resides in an election for national, state, or local office, or at a statewide or local referendum. Mr. Johnson, please.
The referendum, I thought your opening comment there was pretty clear. What we're attempting to do there is clarify that citizens are eligible voters. Citizens. People who are citizens of the United States are eligible to vote in our elections. Citizens.
Ms. Brown?
It is already illegal to vote if you are not a citizen. And what that particular amendment does is changes one very important word from every to only, which means that it's going to make it much more difficult for somebody who is a citizen to vote if they move regularly like a student does. Maybe they lived in one dorm one year and the next year another dorm. Makes it hard for military veterans to vote. It suppresses the vote. it tightens up restrictions in a way that doesn't actually come across as obvious because the word every was changed to only. So I would recommend voting no, and most of the nonpartisan groups in Wisconsin would also recommend the same.
Thank
Do you want people other than citizens to
I
vote?
think we're not going to have back and forth, so
Okay.
if a candidate wishes to address something the other candidate has said, you should include that in your response to the next question, please.
Okay.
The next question actually comes from 3 different individuals, it appears, on the general topic of agriculture. This district is a strong agricultural district now, or how do you propose to represent and support the agricultural community? Second card, since Wisconsin is an agricultural state, what do you feel is the biggest issue facing our farmers? What are you going to do about it? And the final question, traditional agriculture and family farms rank in the top 2 to 3 industries in this district. How will you represent them, and what are your personal opinions on current agricultural production practices and how they relate to government regulation and policy, environment, technology, etc.? Ms. Brown, you'll take that question first, please.
So, yeah, this district is about 40% agricultural. It has some of the youngest farmers in the country farming here. And there are a number of issues. Currently, at least in this district, there isn't really a problem with water quality, though that is existing in other parts of Wisconsin. But it's something we need to keep an eye on, and that's something that I've done a lot of research on. The cost of land is important. We are dealing with climate change. We're dealing with the fact that there's a gold rush on solar right now, and solar farms, farmers are starting to lease out their land to solar farms, which means that something that costs good soil that costs $1,000 an acre is now going for $12,000 an acre. So we not only have a problem of excellent land being put into solar farm leasing, often without bonding, which means there's no decommissioning built into the lease process of making sure that when that solar farm is decommissioned, it's paid for ahead of time. But also it means that younger farmers can't afford good soil. They can't afford good land to farm on. So what we're doing is a lot of retired farmers who are finding a nest egg really are doing what needs to be done, right? They're making $300,000 a year now on their farm because of solar, but the young farmers can't afford to buy anything. And so what we need to be thinking of is a number of things. There's the PSC, which is our commission that regulates Wisconsin energy companies. We essentially have a regulated monopoly, and we need to think about how we can do that differently where costs are capped and solar farms cannot just spread willy-nilly as quickly as possible with the amount of money that's coming in. We need to control the spread of solar farms, and we need to be listening to the farmers and figuring out what they want. They need broadband desperately so that they can run their machines, and they also need to make sure that we are helping them protect good A1 soil. It's super important, so thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Would you restate the questions, please?
This district is a strong agricultural district. How do you propose to represent and support the agricultural community? Traditional agriculture and family farms rank in the top 2 to 3 industries in this district. How will you represent them? And what are your personal opinions on current agricultural production practices and how they relate to government regulation and policy, environment, technology, etc.? And finally, since Wisconsin is an agricultural state, what do you feel is the biggest issue facing our farmers? What are you going to do about it?
The traditional family farm, many people see that as a small, by today's standards, a small dairy barn with 50, 60 cows and or a small pig farm. It is a very small farm by today's standards. Most farms today that are in production agriculture that are fairly efficient tend to be much larger family operations. They may be operating 1,000 to 3,000 acres. They may be milking 2, 3, 500, 700, 1,000, 6,000 cows. They may be also producing thousands of pigs. Agriculture has got lots of diversity within itself, even within the its own production capabilities. We have small farms, we have big farms. Ms. Brown speaks of the solar farm. Those are farms that have basically are being developed by venture capitalists responding to some very aggressive Democratic bills that want us to move to renewable energies. And we can move to renewable energies, we just need to do it at a slower pace. We shouldn't be building these farms necessarily on the prime ag land, but I'm not going to stop that farmer's property rights. If they need that they see that for their retirement, that's no different than the farmer in the past selling his land for development in the city. It's a very challenging balancing act between protecting the farm right to farm in an agricultural production zone and those of residential homeowners that have moved into the residential zone because they want the vistas. So it's going to be a very big balancing act.
Next question, we'll go first to Mr. Johnson. This is on the subject of tax incremental financing. And we have 2 cards on that one. What is tax incremental financing and how does it both help and sometimes hurt a community? And the second one, how does TIF or tax incremental financing work and when should you use it? Mr. Johnson.
Well, TIF or TID districts have been very successful in Wisconsin. They basically allow a community to encourage development. It could be restoring historical buildings. It could be restoring or rebuilding in a blighted district. Or it could also, it's been most commonly or most effectively used to bring employers and manufacturing industry into communities, which are job creators. Those in turn then create, you have an employee workforce that moves into your community and their income gets multiplied many times throughout your local businesses for supporting those employees that are working at that manufacturing plant. So it allows you to designate funds to build infrastructure, build roads, support the development or redevelopment of those areas. It puts a little bit of a burden on the rest of your community because there are services they are using that for which their taxes are not going to cover, that you are going to cover those expenses while that TIF district is working through its years of having those funds earmarked for that particular development.
Ms. Brown?
So I think we've got the explanation of what TIF funding is. It is one of the few tools that a city has to do any development. In fact, the state has really restricted the tools that cities have to do development in their communities. And it is commonly used to make sure that you are encouraging businesses to invest in your community and build in your community. But what I have found on city council over the years is that we cannot get businesses to come here if there's no housing. When we ask them to come, we say, hey, we'll even give you land. They say, yeah, but you don't have any housing, and we can't get employees to work for us if you don't have enough places for them to live. So TIFs can be used in a way that there's a little bit of risk. For instance, in 2008, the city did some TIF funding for the east side. We put together a roundabout. We put all this infrastructure underneath the roads because we wanted to build there, and then the 2008 financial crisis hit. And we ended up going into the red because of that, because nobody wanted to build there all of a sudden. Everybody's bank loans were taken away. So those things can happen. But it's really important to understand that recently the city has decided to use TIF funding to encourage building of missing middle housing. So missing middle housing is that 1,200 square foot house that people desperately need to move into as young professionals, or retirees want to move into because they want to downsize from their larger homes. That has not been built across the country for about 30, 40 years. It hasn't been built in Whitewater for about 30 years as well. And so we decided to use TIF funding because we need to get that housing in the first place if we were able to provide actual workers for the businesses that we want to come to Whitewater as well. It's absolutely essential for economic development.
The next question will go to Ms. Brown first. There are 3 cards, all related in some way to taxation, and the first one is titled Educational Referendums. I'm a retired educator from East Janesville. I'm also a landlord that pays significant property taxes. I want to support our schools, but I want reasonable property taxes. Should I be supporting the 2 school referendums in Janesville? $14 million operating and $151 million building upgrades. What should the Assembly be doing in the future to change this school funding issue? Next card titled Taxation. Please share your thoughts on how Wisconsin taxation policies should change. What balance of income, property, corporate, and other taxes will be fair and help our economy, service needs, etc.? Third one labeled Property Taxes. Do you believe the state legislature should cap local government's ability to raise property taxes? Ms. Brown, please.
All right, there's a lot to get through here. So in terms of property taxes, one of the reasons why people's property taxes go up is because there's a lack of housing. If you don't have enough housing, the fact that you have a roof over your head means your house is assessed higher, which means your property taxes go up. The state, to a degree, already does tax the city's ability to raise your property taxes. Most property taxes, when they go up through referendum, and this is where we come to the education system. Tommy Thompson, Republican governor, promised that we would be funding our schools at 2/3 funding. And ever since that promise was made, the Republicans have continuously defunded our education system so that at this point it is defunded down to about 30%. Now, Governor Evers changed that a little bit with his line item veto. He managed to bump it up a little bit, but we are not at 75%. And what happens is if we're paying our income taxes to the state fund, and we're not getting that shared revenue back, whether it's shared revenue to the city or shared revenue to the school districts, that means we have to pay again, and that means we have to vote to go to referendum. Now, when you go to a referendum, you're supposed to be going to referendum for a new tennis court. You're not supposed to be going to referendum to basically pay your teachers and keep the lights on. And what's happening is a lot of that money that has been defunded from the public education system has been going not only into private schools, but just in general, it's defunding the public education system. They're trying to put less and less money into it. If you are going to try to fund public education, you need to actually complete that funding from the state level, and that referendum should not be trying to make up for that difference. 100 schools that went to referendum, school districts that went to referendum last April, 50% of them would not have gone to referendum if they had simply been reimbursed for special education funding. So that's what we need to be doing, is paying attention to the state and how it is reimbursing. And once we get housing in, our property taxes will go down in that place as well. So yes, vote for it, please.
Mr. Johnson.
The funding formula is broken. It needs to be replaced, transformed, transfigured. I'm working on a bill that will both lower the local property tax that supports public education, and it will put more GFR into supporting schools. We need to allow those schools that have been underspending and held back a mechanism that they can actually close the gap with high-spending school districts. The local property tax is literally chasing people out of their homes, is that property tax. They're going to start voting against the referendums, as Ms. Brown has spoke of, because it's self-preservation or educating my grandchildren. We shouldn't be putting our people in those positions. I think there's an opportunity for us to move GFR into supporting the schools and reducing the property tax load on the local basis. It's a transformative opportunity. relative to your current referendums, when those referendums fail, basically, it's $100,000 per educator. If they're asking for $3 million for an operating budget, they're going to remove about 30 educators if that should fail. We are reaching a point where those will be turned down simply because of homeowners have made the choice that self-preservation is more valuable than educating my children. The shared revenue is a situation where we put in record shared revenue last biennium. We put in record funding to education last biennium. It still isn't done right. It still isn't enough. We need to rework all those formulas. That work will be done. I am working on that.
Next question goes first to Mr. Johnson on the subject of gun control. I believe you are both gun owners. What type of guns do you own? How do you promote gun safety? What state regulations and laws do you support? Mr. Johnson.
I'm a deer hunter. We've harvested some 800 deer off my farm over the last 30 years. I like the 30-30. You have to be, just pretty careful that you have that animal in the freezer basically when you pull the trigger. I have rifles for deer hunting. I have them locked up and put out of sight, and they're unloaded when stored. That's my sporting activity. I have shotguns, I have rifles, they're under lock and key.
Ms. Brown?
So, again, I grew up in a military family. My father was a great lover of guns. I think at one point he owned about 200. And I grew from all points of view, right? From the very earliest to the very latest. And so I own hunting rifles. I own a couple of revolvers and a couple of pistols. And I used to go often with my father and practice at the range, as well as hunting. We all know that guns are for killing. So I think the specious argument of guns don't kill people, people kill people is really silly. I mean, that's what guns are for. Most people don't have a really good understanding of gun safety. The NRA used to be an organization that taught gun safety. And as a kid who grew up in a very violent place in Iran with a dad who had $1 million price on his head, I was taught gun safety. But the major thing here is that we need to make sure that it is easier to track and track guns, and it's easier to track guns and harder to sell guns. My opponent here voted for a bill to make it easier to sell and harder to track guns. I don't think that is responsible for gun owners, and most gun owners would agree. And I do really believe in terms of what Every Town for Gun Action and Moms Demand Action, they have some really great common sense gun laws that we can put into place to make sure that guns are safer, that you have more people who are required to do background checks, not just licensed gun dealers. And there are some really great red flag laws out there that prevent gun violence ahead of time. The biggest killer of children in the country is guns. And I think we need to be doing something to fix that. So as much as I was raised with the background of gun ownership and the tradition of gun hunting, I think we need to be doing some more things.
Next question is on the subject of public safety funding. This goes first to Ms. Brown. How do you plan to help townships with the excessive cost of fire and EMS protection and getting the university system to pay for the same protection at the same rates as townships? Ms. Brown?
This is definitely something that we can accomplish at the state level. Right now, the university doesn't pay taxes to the city, and that's fine. It's a state organization. Our economy is very dependent on it fine. But there are problems with the way our EMS, fire, and police department are funded. And again, this has a lot to do with shared revenue. We went to referendum to make sure that our EMS and fire department were professionalized so that they could actually have insurance and make sure they were getting paid, $15, $20 an hour instead of $5 an hour to go out and run into a burning building. And we were essentially punished by the legislature for having an agreement with the university with shared services for those services. So essentially what I would like to see is the state legislature saying, okay, well, let's make sure that the cities have the money that they need, the shared revenue they need to make sure that they can pay for those shared services and the fire EMS first responder services. It's absolutely essential. It's what we think we're paying for anyway with our income taxes. Let's make sure it's done. And I think in terms of the university system, it may or may not affect the way education is funded. We may have to throw that into the formula too for universities who need to share those services, but that can be done at the state level, and it's definitely worth exploring.
Mr. Johnson?
The shared revenue bill that we passed here in the last biennium improved, basically the shared revenue increased about 25% for most cities, villages, and the towns. That percentage is way higher, but the dollars are much smaller. So but the question really goes to, we're moving from a volunteer system in fire and EMS services to paid services. There's a significant cost increase, and the state will need to look at properly supporting those, most likely through shared revenue. Shared revenue amounts to about 30% of the city's revenue. Local property tax amounts to about 50-60% of the local city's revenue. If all the taxpayers did what Ms. Brown did, the city would be short about 50% of its budget. And so I think it's really important that she understands the value and the trust and the need, as her fellow citizens understand, to pay your taxes when due, because it has an impact on the city's coffers and the city's ability to operate. We've improved the shared revenue. We cannot overcome the lack of local support by the citizens.
Thank you. Next question goes to Mr. Johnson first. This is on the subject of immigration. In September, the Wall Street Journal ran an article on the immigration issue in Whitewater, increased costs for the police department, school district, and housing. As a state legislature, what can you do to lower the financial burden for state and local taxpayers? Wisconsin needs legal immigration, but the burden can be overwhelming. And then dovetailing with that, question about driver's licenses for immigrants without documents. Background: current state law allows undocumented immigrants to own cars but prohibits them from driving. Driving privileges were repealed in 2007, Assembly Bill 69. 19 states allow those without papers to obtain a driver's license, including our neighbors Illinois and Minnesota. Question: for the safety of all citizens, do you support or oppose the training and testing of those immigrants currently unable to obtain a license? Would you be willing to write and/or support legislation to once again extend driver's license eligibility to immigrants living in Wisconsin without proof of citizenship or legal residency? And another card along the same lines. Until 2006, undocumented immigrants were allowed to have driver's licenses in Wisconsin. This is especially harmful to those, for instance, working in agriculture. Do you agree with the Wisconsin Farm Bureau and the Dairy Business Association that returning driver's license eligibility to undocumented workers should be reinstated again? Why or why not? So, reminder, the first question had to do with the increased cost to municipalities related to immigration, and the second one regarding driver's license for undocumented individuals.
I'll answer the last one first. The driver licenses need to be offered to the immigrants regardless of how they're here. The impact on your uninsured motorist costs are skyrocketing because we have people driving without licenses. Without licenses, they cannot be insured, and they're driving without insurance. So the challenge, I think, that caused that privilege to go away had to do with voting. And but we need to have our drivers on the road insured and educated to our road rules. Relative to immigration costs to a community, throughout the history of immigration, it's not been uncommon for ethnic groups to find a location, they write home, their relatives come, and we have communities that are largely German, largely Italian, largely Polish, largely Scandinavian, Dutch. You can find them throughout the state, throughout the country. It's just a common phenomenon. What's occurring now, though, is basically being forced upon us where people invite someone in or they bring in a busload with no concern about what the public can or can't support. The challenge to in this situation, in this community, also turned into a communication issue because the dialect was such uniqueness. Neither the police nor the immigrants could communicate to one another what the expectation was or what the rules should be. And it's just, you have a culture class for a time period. It takes about a generation for that to turn around, for them to get the language understood through the school system. The school system, it has had an impact on them, but they have addressed it in a manner that seems to be working for them.
Ms. Brown?
Well, I'm glad we mostly agree on this. I also think that driver's licenses should be reinstated, that immigrants should be able to take a test and get their license and be able to get insurance and know how to drive and get to their jobs. And it does take some time away from our police force because they're spending a lot of their time pulling people over for not having a license that goes with the registered car. They have more important things to do than pull somebody over because they're taking their kids to school. So essentially, we agree on this. Social services are a really important aspect of this, and honestly, we have needed more social services in Whitewater for a while for a number of things. I would love to see that funded better at the state level as well. And there are no busloads of immigrants coming here. Many of the immigrants, especially the Nicaraguans who came here, were here in 2020 when Trump was president. I personally knocked on doors and was speaking Spanish with people. I am a non-native Spanish speaker, and I understood their dialect. So it had more to do with the fact that our police department only has one Spanish speaker on staff, and they had to use a translation service over the phone, and that has more to do with the problems in terms of the police department not being able to understand people. Whitewater is really doing some amazing things with our volunteers, and even our city is putting out educational videos in Spanish to help our new immigrants understand just some of the social norms. So it takes a community to bring our neighbors into the fold, and we're doing a great job of that in Whitewater. And I also would like to address the concept of funding. Funding can come from a number of places, such as progressive funding for the wealthy. The wealthier should pay more in taxes. We can also legalize marijuana and make sure that that is regulated, and we're getting money from marijuana to go into the system. We're losing billions of dollars right now to other states, and that money could go right into funding all of these things that supposedly there's no funding for.
Next question, we have two cards, one of them titled Women's Reproductive Freedom and the other titled Abortion. This goes to Ms. Brown first. What is your stance on women's reproductive freedom? And the second, what is the current abortion law and how do you think it should change?
Well, from my opening statement, you can tell how I feel about reproductive freedom, but I want to be a little bit more specific here. The state should not be overreaching into women's lives and deciding who is worthy of an abortion and who is not worthy of an abortion. My opponent here in 2022 on Wisconsin I said that he only believed women should have abortions if they were raped or were victims of incest. I find that to be incredibly extreme. Women have all sorts of issues that happen during their pregnancies. Pregnancies can be very difficult, and women make the biggest economic decision of their lives for their families when they discover or when they decide if they're going to have a child or not. This is absolutely essential. Women need to be able to decide how they're going to live their lives, how they're going to talk to their family and their priest about this. It's just really overreach for the government to decide who is worthy and who is not. When we look at the states south of the Mason-Dixon line, we already see women dying left and right because the state has decided who is worthy, and doctors are refusing to do the work needed to help somebody with a miscarriage or help somebody who has had a problem later on in pregnancy, even early in pregnancy. And the fact is, again, the state and religious fanatics should not be telling women what to do with their bodies. And we need to make sure we get rid of the 1849 abortion ban that's on the Constitution right now. Luckily for us, a Dane County judge said that it does not actually make abortion illegal, but that does not mean that's going to change if the Republicans keep a supermajority. They will continue to vote against women's rights, and my opponent has also done so. He has voted for making abortion illegal after 14 weeks. So again, it's not the decision of the state, and we should make sure that we essentially codify something like Roe versus Wade in the state.
Mr. Johnson?
Find it interesting that I am accused of voting for the 1849 law. I share a birthday with Abraham Lincoln. I was not born in his era. I did not put the 1849 law on the books. I would repeal that law. She did not address what the current law is. The current law allows 20 weeks by judicial decree. In caucus, I asked my caucus to go for 18 to 20 weeks. Abortion is still taking a life. I would rather be working on adoption and giving those unwanteds a loving home to go to. With any time limit that you have on abortion, most of it occurs prior to 12 weeks. Rape, incest, and exceptions should always be on the order between a doctor and a patient. Abortion is not birth control. It's a life. And we need to respect that. But I don't believe that the government should intrude between doctor and patient. But it's the euphemism of health care. It's abortion. It's taking a life. And we need to cherish that. We need to work on lowering the costs and the barriers to adoption and preserving that life. I am always challenged by those journeys who I haven't had to walk through. But it's an issue that we need to put to rest and move on and do far better than what we're currently doing.
Next question is on the subject of Medicaid funding. This will go to you first, Mr. Johnson. Is it a good idea for Wisconsin to accept federal Medicaid funding, and why?
It sounds like a real simple answer. Why wouldn't we take the money? Because the money changes everything we've already got in place. We have waivers. We're the only state that has waivers that covers everything that we are currently providing in Medicaid. We don't leave any gaps there. And because of the waivers, we also make Obamacare available for anyone who just is above those threshold limits. I don't know that we could do better. We could accept the money, and then we could be held responsible for covering all those costs when the feds decide to lower their budgets and stop aiding the states. I think the plan that we have in place is appropriate for, for the people it serves, and for those that are just beyond it, Obamacare is available at a very minimal cost. I think the risk and exposure is just unwarranted.
Ms. Brown?
One of the reasons why Medicaid needs to be expanded in Wisconsin is because though we have this exceptional Badger Care system, which is essentially our Medicaid for Wisconsinites, there are other things that Medicaid funds. They fund rural hospitals, it keeps EMS and fire departments going. I mean, it funds ambulances, especially in rural areas where many people don't have a lot of money. They may be retirees on fixed incomes. It's our ambulance services that are paid for through Medicaid. Another really interesting thing that I have learned, one of my constituents has a son who lives in a facility in Illinois who is on Medicaid there, and they take federal Medicaid. When he brings his son to Wisconsin, the Medicaid doesn't apply anymore, which means he's afraid to bring his kid back home to Wisconsin because he doesn't have medical care if he gets sick.
Can we take a time out? This is a blatant misrepresentation.
Excuse me, if you have something to say, you can say it in your next time.
So after having that complaint, there are some really interesting things that we do need to think about in terms of taking Medicaid funding. I am aware that there is a whole system built around our Badger Care, but guess what? That's what the legislature's job is to do, is to fix complicated issues and figure out how to get through it.
This next question goes first to you, Ms. Brown, on the subject of elder abuse crime. Do you think DATCP has the resources to properly educate Wisconsin on elder abuse issues? Another one titled Elder Abuse. Elder financial abuse is a growing concern. What steps would you take to prevent the financial exploitations of seniors, especially those in the early stages of Alzheimer's or mild cognitive dementia?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I actually don't know a lot about this subject, and I'm definitely willing to research it more. But I do know that the Republican supermajority has been defunding a number of the state organizations in Wisconsin for a long time. When you look at what they've done for education and the DNR and social services, including epidemiology and science research, my assumption would be they are defunded and underfunded as well. So I'm willing to look into it and find out if that is the case, but I would hazard a guess that I'm correct on that.
Mr. Johnson?
Elder abuse. We have to educate, we have to inform. Many bankers have come to us because we are trying to equip them with tools so they can stop the out of normal activity that occurs with some of our elders. They get the scam calls, they come in, they make withdrawals that are not anywhere near normal, and they don't have the authority to stop that transaction from taking place. They come in, the scammers tell them how to do it, so they try to make it look in small amounts, and they still can drain $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in a matter of hours. We need to get, it's real challenging, because if your banker suddenly says you can't take a withdrawal, and because you're wanting to do something, it's where do you start and stop those rights? We have powers of attorney for people, but when you're starting to go into that phase of life, you don't want to recognize it. You may not recognize it. You may continue to believe that you have control over everything, and yet the scammers are preying on that very little bit of doubt that they can create and get it. It's a very challenging subject. It's not an easy one to overcome. I've seen situations where you've read about it. They call up, your son's in jail, you got to send $2,000 or $5,000, and they do that. And once those funds have left, they're gone. You can't trace them down, you can't recall them. Much of this is done from overseas, done by phone. They've gone to even buying cards, buying gift cards.
Next question goes first to you, Mr. Johnson. Two cards that are somewhat related. Topic of disability rights. How do you plan to support UWW, that is University of Wisconsin-Whitewater's disabled students in Madison? And the second one titled Special Education. How do you intend to support schools with students who have significant special education needs, who require more dollars than categorical and federal flow-through aid?
Okay, the disability, in the bill I'm working on, we have a mechanism built in there so that depending upon the level of disability, you get a multiplier of the student aid that you would get otherwise. So the more challenging the student becomes, the more aid the district gets for that particular student. The intent is to try to effectively provide the funding for the students that show up. When I was on the school board, we would have six-figure students that would show up unexpectedly. You're obligated as a public institution to take care of that child, whether you have the budget planned or not. And when that child shows up unexpectedly, you take the funds out of your general programming and you put it into special education to take care of that child. The disability, I don't know what Brianne was speaking about relative to my relative. He lives here. He lived with me for 30-some years. We provided for him until he could no longer be cared for by us. He just recently, in the last few years, moved into a group home. He's in Wisconsin. I don't know where she got her information. Blatantly wrong, misrepresented.
Ms. Brown?
Whoever your relative is, I wasn't talking about that person. So in terms of disability rights, education, Robin Voss is the leader of the majority party, and he essentially was one of the people who kept funding from universities, DEI funding, stopped raises for everybody, not just professors, but sanitation workers, food service, because he wanted to get rid of DEI funding. Well, that DEI at the school, at the university level means military veterans who are coming into the civilian workforce again and coming into school again. It means people with disabilities who need extra help as well. We have, I think 1 in 8 students at the university in Wisconsin has some disability and needs some extra help here or there, which is fantastic. So in terms of that kind of funding, we need to make sure that we don't stop raises and prevent money that has been allocated to go to the universities. Universities need that. They need to be able to help people who are maybe even non-traditional students, right, who are coming in to get a good education. In terms of special education, I think this may refer to more K through 12 schools. And currently, the way K through 12 works is if you are going to a public school, your school is reimbursed at 30% for your student who has a disability of some sort or needs special education. If that same student goes to a charter school, which also gets public school money, they get 90% funding at the private school. If they leave that private school after the nose count and go back to the public school, the money does not follow that child back to the public school. So the private school gets to keep it. So at the very least, we need to make sure that the money follows the child in terms of K through 12 education. I would highly recommend that we also increase the amount of money that goes to special education, because the teachers are all begging for it. They need this kind of help. And we just, in general, need to be respecting educators and education more and putting more money into it.
Next question is on the topic of character. You are both elected officials. What do you think should happen when you find out that one of your colleagues has acted or behaved in an unethical manner? Ms. Brown?
So I actually teach ethics at the university, and ethics, and of course I come from a military family, so I have a very strong sense of ethics. You know, it's really important to establish those ground rules, especially if it's a colleague, and try to get on the same page with them in terms of ethics. I, you know, even recently had a conversation with during Common Council last year where somebody was saying, well, it's not illegal. I was like, I know it's not illegal, but it's not ethical. So sometimes those two, you know, don't completely overlap, and you need to still act as a person who's honest and decent and compassionate, and making sure that you're not doing things that are self-serving. And it's you know, it's hard for a lot of people to, if they didn't have a strong ethical base in the first place, to be able to understand that when you become a person who has more responsibility, it can sometimes get to your head, and it's really important to check yourself and make sure that that does not happen.
Mr. Johnson?
Ms. Brown speaks of a strong ethical behavior. Is it ethical to leave your property taxes unpaid for 3 years? Is it ethical for you to ask your fellow taxpayer to pay a greater tax burden because you choose not to pay your property taxes? Is it ethical for you to take international trips while your property taxes remain unpaid?
Next question goes first to Mr. Johnson on the subject of union rights. Under Act 12, passed by Governor Walker, public educators across Wisconsin have lost the right to collectively bargain. Would you support restoring these rights to form a union? Mr. Johnson?
It should have been implemented in a much more favorable fashion. Having served on the school board for 15 years and done negotiations on a routine basis, it was very disingenuous of the union to turn down the best offer up front, out of hand, at the direction of their union steward, as they were trying to establish the value of paying their union dues. The school boards worked very hard to figure out the budget. How much can we apply to the reward that we offer our staff, whether it be in salary or fringe benefit? We spent years trying to get our educational, our insurance costs down by offering increase our deductibles and offer the staff the same increase in an HSA account. So if we wanted to raise deductibles $2,000, we would offer them a $2,000 stipend in their HSA account. And the negotiating team would refuse that for a number of years. We believe it was because some of them didn't feel they would benefit from it. They had high medical care costs. It didn't do them any harm. It simply, they were going to consume their stipend in their doctor visits, whereas their peers would have benefited many years because they were blessed, they were healthy. They would have had an HSA account accumulating value. So school boards are trying to be extremely judicious and fair with the taxpayer money. We can't just write blank checks. We can spend money till we're blue in the face, but a taxpayer has to pay it.
Ms. Brown?
So when Act 10 was implemented, that took collective bargaining away from teachers. Teachers had good middle-class jobs. They knew how to plan for their retirement. They were strong members of the communities. You could teach at a large school or a tiny school of 50 or 800 people, and those kids would get the exact same quality of education. When you take away collective bargaining and you make it impossible for teachers to negotiate for fair salaries, what you end up having is disparity across the board. The smaller school districts who cannot afford to pay their teachers the same amount that larger, richer school districts can, end up not being able to retain their teachers. The teachers, for instance, at Whitewater, we get some great teachers who get awards, and they immediately get poached by richer school districts because they can afford to pay them better. When we had collective bargaining, teachers could be a part of the community wherever they wanted to be a part of the community. They could raise their children there, and we all know that the schools are absolutely the hub of any community, especially small towns. So one of the things I would advocate for is making sure that Act 10 is rescinded so that we can have teachers negotiating for their salaries again and getting great jobs in whatever town they want to live in again. And we need to make sure those teachers are respected, and we need to make sure that money is coming back into the school system in a fair way so those schools are getting that 2/3 funding that they need. It's absolutely essential that we actually start respecting education again. There used to be a time when Wisconsin was number 5 in the country in education, and right now I think we're down to like number 29, and that's after having pulled ourselves up because of Governor Evers. We need to make sure that we are paying our teachers and that they're not losing faith in the system and not essentially leaving their jobs and burning out. They need all of the support that we can give them, including with administrative and support staff.
Next question goes first to Ms. Brown. We have 2 cards that are similar. First, bipartisan agreement. By representing the citizens of Wisconsin, are you willing to vote in a manner that represents your constituents? In other words, are you willing to choose principles over party? And the other titled, Working Together. Please share your experiences in working with a diverse group to reach compromise. How do you process information and ideas and reach decisions?
So what's really great about the fair maps that we've now got in Wisconsin, we need to make sure that we stay with fair maps. This is not a permanent situation. But the assembly will be roughly 50-50. We will finally be free of the Republican supermajority. The Republican supermajority essentially made it really impossible to get anything done in a bipartisan manner, and part of that was because of gerrymandering. When you gerrymander, you basically pick who your voters are, and you're very safely in your district. When you're safe in your district, you don't have to listen to your voters, your constituents at all, because you're going to vote with party or else you'll lose your job. So now that we're going to be in a 50-50 district, 50-50 in the state, we are going to have a situation where Republicans are going to have to work for their jobs. They're going to have to talk to their constituents, and they're going to have to represent their constituents. I personally think that having been on city council for 6 years, library board for 12 years, there's a lot of bipartisanship that happens. We work together all the time on things, discussing how we can invest best in our community and most wisely. There have been lots of really strong discussion, whether it was in closed session or whether it was in front of the public, and I'm a chronic disease scientist. I'm data driven. You show me the numbers and you show me the data, and that is where I'm going to take my decision making from. I don't do things from a gut feeling. I do things if you show me the proof, and I think that's a really wise way to do it, is look at things in a scientific way. Bipartisanship, we can all look forward to that in the assembly. It won't happen until the Senate also becomes a 50-50, and that's 2 years from now, but we're on our way to making sure that we can make these good decisions together.
Mr. Johnson?
So the public is aware that we do not have fair maps. We have partisan drawn maps. We still need fair maps. We have maps that are drawn by the Democratic Party. She is correct that there's probably going to be a narrowing of the difference between the amount of representatives each party has in the assembly. She is probably incorrect in believing that the Democrats are going to flip the assembly or the Senate. I am a moderate on the far left of my caucus, they did not enjoy listening to my discussions during caucus because I just said, come a little bit closer, come a little bit off the edge. We can do far more representing the people in the middle. We can do far better legislation if we work a little bit towards the middle. We don't need to have a puppet vote, a person who's just going to comply with what the party leadership says. We need a person who's willing to stand up and tell the leadership, here's where we need to go. I've already done that. I'm not well received. But the party needs to hear that message. And if I would be elected from this district, my voice in that caucus will be even louder. Because I'm coming from a district that is blatantly Democratic.
Next question goes to you, Mr. Johnson. Topic of state budget surplus. What should the budget surplus be spent on?
Simple question. We attempted to return that to the taxpayers a couple different ways, all got vetoed last time. I've spoke earlier of the education funding bill that I'm working on to reformat the way we properly fund public education. Part of that bill is to reduce the level of property tax on the local homeowner and that renters pay. The surplus is one-time money, so it's really challenging to utilize that in a recurring cost formula. It really doesn't work that way. It's like a savings account. You spend it, it's gone. Unless you put it back in, it doesn't come back. So when you're looking at it, it sounds like a really big number, but we collect about $5-6 billion a year in local property tax to support our local school systems. So I can't make much of a change there without really using recurring funds. So that the surplus, it's just a real challenging thing to look at because we could use it for one-time money, maybe give you a year worth of support for one item, but then you get it into your budget, and then the next year you have to create the funds out of your own taxpayers to keep that going. That will increase, that'll put another burden on you to raise your local property taxes, which is just the opposite of what we're trying to do in lowering taxes. We need to have fiscal restraint. We can't just spend and spend and spend or tax and spend. We have to have fiscal responsibility. We need to be respectful of our taxpayer, our fellow taxpayer who's struggling to keep the lights on, the heat on, the medications purchased.
Ms. Brown?
So a lot of that tax surplus, that budget surplus that the state of Wisconsin had, some of it came from pandemic money, and a lot of it came from education, which we had been defunding. So we're thinking, if you're thinking about what to do with that budget surplus, it wasn't really a surplus, was it? We took it from education, a lot of it. So I would recommend that it goes back to education. Again, we have never gotten up to that 2/3 funding that Tommy Thompson promised. And I will come back to my concept of why don't we figure out how we can, for instance, Wisconsin has a progressive tax history. We actually kind of invented progressive tax in the United States. Right now, billionaires and multimillionaires pay less in taxes than we do, percentage-wise. So if we're thinking about progressive taxation, we should go back to that. In the times of Eisenhower, when lots of things were invested in, we had a lot of infrastructure and education invested in. Millionaires were taxed at 80%, and I'm not even saying 80%, I'm saying 30. Like, we could just go up a little bit in terms of how we can create that consistent funding that continues to fund the things that we want to be funding, such as education, such as building our roads, such as making sure that we have things taken care of in our cities and towns with fire, EMS, and police department.
This will be our last question, and it goes first to you, Ms. Brown. It's titled Voice of the People. The legislature voted to outlaw the voice of the people by banning advisory referendums. If elected, what would you do to give the voices back to the people, would you reverse the current ban?
I think it's a really good idea to do so. I know it's scary and tricky to let the voice of the people reign. Sometimes we don't always trust our, fellow citizens to make good decisions, but it's really important to allow democracy to be available to all, and I think advisory referendums are a little silly. I think we need to be really working toward referenda that can be submitted by the people and not by the legislature. Currently, if you want to have a referendum on the ballot, the legislature, the majority party in the legislature basically has to pass it in 2 sessions, and then they get to put the referendum on the ballot, so that the people don't actually have a decision about what kind of referendum they want on the ballot. They just get the choice to vote for it once the state has decided for them. I think that the more we can move toward democracy, the better. There are pitfalls in that. You have to make sure education is excellent, that you're getting the word out about what things mean, and making sure that people are really well informed when they make that vote happen. But it is what our country is all about, is making sure that the people have a voice.
Mr. Johnson?
The people have a voice every time they go to vote at the ballot box. Term limits are one of those things that we should probably also have in place. And there'll be many people that tell you, well, we already have term limits. All we have to do is go to the ballot box and change our vote. And perhaps some of the problems in Washington would change if we would do that, instead of allowing people a 20 and 30 and 40-year career. So I think the ballot box is whether the, you have a group of elected officials looking in the detail, in this case of perhaps the Constitution or the governance of your state, and they put forth a referendum, they put forth a question that they think is judicious to look at and consider. We owe it as citizens to study that and give them a vote on it. And we can do that at the ballot box. You as individuals can approach us and ask us to put forth the question you want asked, that you think we ought to address. And we can work with our legislative colleagues and we can put that forth. I don't know that the ballot box is not operating. I think it works fairly fine. I think it's just a matter of you taking the time and working with your current representatives. It works at the local level.
Thank you both for providing us with your views and positions on the issues brought up today. This is a valuable service to voters. You will each now have 2 minutes for closing remarks. For these remarks, the speaking order is reversed. So Ms. Brown, you'll go first, please.
So thank you very much for spending your morning with us again. I really appreciate the time to show the distinct differences between me and my opponent. One of the things that has concerned me the most is that when he ran against Representative Ruink, he went negative on him and called him a career politician, and it looks like going negative is the way that happens. I've had a number of people tell me that he claims to be a moderate, and yet when you look at this voting record, we have dozens of bills where we have a right-wing Robin Voss rubber stamp on these bills. There is absolutely nothing moderate about his voting record. The only things he voted on that would be moderate were the things that everybody unanimously agreed on in the Assembly. So I just want to reiterate that I have really, really loved working for my community here in Whitewater. I feel that I have this amazing background of journalism, science, and research, and doing my research and understanding a lot of different things and a lot of ways of doing things. And I get along really well with people, and I really think that bipartisanship is going to happen. Just looking in a positive direction in terms of Wisconsin finally getting out of the gerrymander and making sure that our votes actually do count. We are going to be seeing some really lovely stuff happening in January, and I can't wait to see you in Madison. Thanks.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, it's interesting. She talks about going negative, and she puts out basically flyers that don't represent the reality, but that's their view of it. I want to emphasize the importance of integrity found in this community, where principles and honesty and fairness and ethical standards create an environment of mutual trust. This is a glue that holds the community together. The facts are, based on public available records, Ms. Brown voted more than once to raise Whitewater taxes. Those taxes have increased, pushing nearly 30%. Ms. Brown has a documented history of practicing tax evasion while increasing your taxes. She's avoided paying taxes. She's had funds to enjoy international trips to exotic locations while she's not paid her taxes. Amazingly, this summer, $15,000 appeared that she found that she could use to pay off her accumulated tax debt after spending months of fundraising. Non-compliant taxpayers force accountable citizens to cover the tax shortfall in order to fund your police, your schools, and your other essential services. Many have commented, if she wasn't running for state office, the tax bill would have remained unpaid. This is an erosion of public trust stemming from hypocrisy and financial mismanagement. If she can't manage her own family budget, how is she going to help you with the state budget? My commitment to you is to work towards securing and continuing to secure the funding that I've already delivered to Whitewater. There's some $80 million that are going to be invested into the Winter and Hyde Halls. That came about because of efforts I put forth to secure that for the campus. Under the current leadership, the economy is struggling and many families are facing difficult choices between essential needs. I'm committed to helping ensure that our teachers, students, health departments, essential services have the genuine support that they need. Thank you.
Thank you both for your participation today, and also thank you to the audience for coming and for submitting such a wide variety of questions. I think we really covered a lot of subjects today. As we bring the forum to a close, we'd like to remind voters that this forum was filmed by Whitewater Community TV and live streamed to their video website. A recording will soon be rebroadcast on Channel 990 and will be available for viewing on the city's website during the weeks leading up to the November 5th general election. I suspect that most everybody listening, being an engaged voter, is already registered, but if not currently registered at your current address, the registration deadline for this election online is October the 16th, or if mailed, needs to be postmarked also by October the 16th. This state, however, does also allow in-person registration on election day. Just remember that you must have both your photo ID and proof of residence in order to register. You may check your registration status by using Wisconsin's voter information tool. If you need to update your registration, if you have moved or have a name change, if you have legally changed your name or moved to a new address, you'll need to update your voter record by submitting a new voter registration. You can do this online by searching for your voter record using your name and date of birth. If your name has changed, you may need to search using your prior name. If you have not yet voted this year, you will find that there is a change in the city voting process. You used to have the poll worker file through a very large poll book. We have now entered the 21st century and have an electronic poll book which has proven to be very efficient. It really moves the line very quickly. You just need to have your photo ID ready and you'll probably get your ballot and be on your way very quickly. You'll get a receipt actually from that first poll worker, which allows you to go and get the proper ballot. The ballot itself will be identical to the way that you've seen before. You'll enter it into the same machine, and if you wish, you'll probably still be able to get that famous sticker. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and let's give our candidates appreciation.